So we want to talk about materials and what you need to have on hand in order to start painting in watercolor. The first thing you need is a sketchbook. And this sketchbook I carry around with me. And I also have like a Pentel black or a Pilot black ink pen, just that you can get at an Office Depot store. And I use the pen because I used to carry around, use pencil and carry around my sketchbook, and the drawings would smear. And so I also write down things that I want to remember, either if I'm painting out of my head or if I'm painting someone that I'm looking at. I write down information so that I have a record of the day or what I'm thinking about, or what I'm trying to remember when I paint. I can also have a bigger sketchbook, and this one I will use pencil, and I can think about paintings and design and what I'm going to put in the painting. I can also think about color and what colors I'm going to use. So sketchbooks are a very important thing to have and use all the time. If I was planning on being an artist or wanted to pursue this as a hobby, I would carry a sketchbook around. It becomes a record of your life and becomes very important. So number one, sketchbook. Item number two to think about would be brushes. You can have a nice case to carry your brushes in. Brushes can be very expensive, or they can be on the less expensive side. The important thing is the watercolor brush has to hold water, so it has to be a nice bristle that will hold the water. I like these Simply Simon brushes. They're a nice price for a beginner, and they work nice. So you can have an inch, you can have a half an inch. This is more of a quarter inch, and then these are squares, and then you can have just a nice round brush. This is a number 8, but you probably want like a number 12. And then you can have a long, thin, narrow brush, a liner brush that you can use. And then brushes can go anywhere from the inexpensive up to the expensive, but as you're starting out, you probably want to start with something that is a little more affordable. So, brushes. Next thing to think about is paper. Paper is very important. It will change the way your painting ends up looking. If you have cheap paper, your paint isn't going to go on as well, so it's important to get, I would suggest a nice block of Arches 140-pound cold press. This is a 9 by 12 inch. That's a nice size. You flip open the thing, and then right here, it's all bound together along the edges. That way you don't have to tape down your paper because it's already taped on the sides. Then when you finish painting the top painting, you can just take a palette knife or a little pocket knife, just reach in under that first layer. You have to make sure you can see that first layer. Reach under that first sheet of paper, and then just rip along there. and go all the way around all the sides of the paper, and then you can take it off. You have to be careful because you don't want your paper to rip. But watercolor paper is important. So watercolor paint is also important. I like to use Winsor Newton professional watercolor paints. Daniel Smith is also a good quality watercolor paint. But as you're beginning, you probably want to use some maybe Winsor Newton Cotman watercolor. That's a student grade. It's going to be less expensive. Sometimes a tube of paint like this, if it's a professional watercolor, can cost you $18. And so with the Cotman, you might feel a little more free to practice. And since you're beginning and trying to learn, you probably want to go with the Cotman. But it's kind of a balance because the student grade paints won't be as nice quality, so you'll have to work harder to get good color. Anyway, so because paints are expensive, you might think, well, I will just put that much paint on my palette. But you should put about that much paint in your palette. Don't be afraid to fill that little pocket with paint. That way you're going to have enough paint to do your paintings. Another thing that I like to do is I set up my paints the same way every single time. So, and this is the essential that you will need. A cad yellow, and I always put warm first just so that I know that that's where I'm starting. So, cad yellow, a lemon yellow, and then I would go with a cad red and a cool red like an alizarin crimson. Then I would go with a cerulean blue and an ultramarine blue, and then maybe that would be all you would need to start out, is just those colors. But you would always set them out the same way. Now, if I'm going to put more paints in here, maybe I would put an orange in between my yellows and my reds. And then towards the end, I would put some earth colors like burnt sienna, burnt umber, and yellow ochre, those colors around here. If I was beginning, I would not put black on my palette. I would try to make black with the colors that I have, and I think that would be important. This is a nice little palette because you can close it and keep it a little airtight. You have to be careful, depending on where you're living, your paints can get some mold on them if they stay wet for too long. So that's something to think about also. So, your palettes. Also, here's an option for a palette, paper plate. Just put your paints down there on your paper plate. This has a plastic finish, so you can mix on there. It's an option if you don't have something else that you can use. Need something to hold your water in? This is my option. It's very nice at a workshop because as you're cleaning your brush out, it makes a nice little ringing sound and annoys the artists that are next to you in the table next to you. This is also an option, or a paper cup is an option, so those are good. You can get a roll of paper towels. This can come in handy. It's a good way to erase some watercolor paint if it's not down exactly the way you want it. Another option, if you're wanting to go green, is a nice tea towel. These are nice. You can just throw them in the wash after, clean them up, but they'll pick up the watercolor also. Mild soap, so you can clean your brushes. Make sure it lay out like a bar of ivory, and just make sure you clean your brushes after you paint. Masking tape. Masking tape is good if you're trying to make a border to keep your paint inside the border. You can put masking tape down. We'll do this when we do some washes later on. And a palette knife. That might be good, or a snap cutter. Those are both very useful. So there's our materials to get started. The next thing we're going to do is kind of learn how to do some washes.